Welcome to the Ghost Show online, my fiends, booze, and ghouls. Your hosts, Seika Groves, Rachel Benter, and Ian Russell will discuss all things paranormal. Prepare to be afraid.
So, what can we say about Krampus? I mean, there's just so many interesting things about Krampus, and we're going to talk a little bit about the history, where it comes from, why did it suddenly become so popular here in North America? Because it's another thing that's gotten appropriated by the culture of North America.
It has. Yep.
It has. It totally has. So we're going to talk about that too, because I want to talk about how people in Germany feel about that. And, you know, there's various types of Krampus, and they're not all called Krampus. We should sort of begin by saying Krampus is a German word, and it actually means claw. So it's based on the claw of Krampus. And Krampus, of course, depending on which depiction you see, it's, you know, he's got horns. See, look, mine are like movable. Hey. I don't think Krampus can move his horns. Maybe he can. I don't know. But there's male Krampus. There's, for the most part, Krampus gets depicted as male. But when we get into the Victorian era, and we start to see postcards and Christmas greetings and things coming out, we start to see female versions of Krampus as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about that too. So Ian, did you go down the rabbit hole on Krampus for this week's show?
I did a little bit. It's interesting that you mentioned right off the top about the German folklore.
Mm-hmm. Oh, German hat.
Because what's that?
Where's your hat? You were going to wear your
my little German hat. Should I put that on?
Yes, put it on for the show.
My little German hat.
Because if I'm wearing horns, you can put on the hat. There we go.
There we go. Right. My little German hat.
There we go. We're
so,
set.
As I said, it's interesting that you mentioned the German folklore. Even though Krampus is a much more broader European thing.
Origin, yes.
Yeah. And it's interesting because my very first exposure, if you want to call it that, to Krampus, or my first education of him, when I was a kid, there was a German family that lived across the street from us, and our two families were very close. And in the German culture, Christmas Eve, December 24th, is much more relevant to them rather than Christmas Day, December 25th. They, at least for our friends across the street. Mm-hmm. And so they celebrated their Christmas on Christmas Eve.
Yes, Christmas Eve.
And because our families were so close, they invited us over every Christmas Eve to celebrate Christmas Eve with them. And that was my first introduction to the Krampus story, because for me, as a young Canadian boy, for me it was Santa Claus.
Mm-hmm.
For the daughters of this German family, of course, for them it was
rolling that out of the screen. I'm like, what's that doing there?
For them, it wasn't Santa Claus, it was Krampus. So that was my first real interaction with the whole Krampus story. And of course, I didn't really understand it.
No.
Just being a little kid, but that was my first sort of down the rabbit hole
adventure to Krampus land.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you know, at the end of the day, like I say, depending on where you are in Europe, essentially, it has different names. It also has different times the year that it kind of comes around. So, we're going to sort of stick to what people know today, the German version of Krampus, right? We'll talk about some of the other stuff, but I kind of want to talk about it because Krampus has a number of sort of stories behind it, and Krampusnacht or Krampus night is actually on December the 5th, right? We have December. The December time, and so it's actually pre the Christian celebration of the holidays, essentially, right? So we have the folklore sort of talking about Krampus, and what exactly was Krampus? Well, I mean, in Germany, they don't really do Santa Claus either. It's St. Nicholas Day, right? So St. Nicholas Day is December the 6th. And that is when, the children would go to see outside their door if they'd been left a shoe or a boot the night before with presents in it. And so in reality, Krampus would come the prior night to this event and collect up all the naughty children and cart them off. And they would be, either given the rod or... Here we go. Did we see that? That was my, by the way. It was,
I don't look anything like it.
No, you don't. It wasn't him. It was just him putting that in front of the screen. But so we have the idea of a way to keep kids in check. So much like we say, Santa's not going to give you anything if you're bad, right? But there's really no consequence to Santa not giving you anything. You're just not getting things. You would maybe
for the naughty children, Santa won't give it to you, but Krampus sure will.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, there's a number of stories, and I kind of really like too in Finland. They have a similar story, only it's, Santa there is a little bit of the combination of both, because he has horns, just like this, right? And
the Finnish Santa.
But there's a Finnish Santa, right? And again, it's kind of a cross between what we would think of Santa Claus and Krampus together, but it's not really considered either or. It's sort of its own thing. There's a really great movie, and if you haven't seen it, it's a Finnish film, and it's called Rare Exports. It's really fun. It's a great, this sort of Yule time, Christmas time movie with the original origins of Santa Claus.
No, I haven't seen that.
Check it out. It's really good. It's subtitled, but for the most part, a good portion of it is in English. And you get the odd Finnish and the odd Russian, in there because of the border between Finland and Russia. But it's a really good film. It's a really fun film, and it's kind of family friendly for the most part. The hero of the story is a young boy, but I'll leave it at that. But it's called Rare Exports, and it's a really great. It's one of my favorite films to watch. Like forget about Miracle on 34th Street or this one's just really, really fun. So, but it kind of goes back to that origin of their original idea. And of course, their idea has big horns. Look, my horns just don't want to stay on my head today.
Well, as far as Krampus goes, that movie is obviously a lot better than the one that I saw.
Oh, the horror movie, Krampus? Yeah.
Oh, the one that I saw, it was made back in 2015.
Yeah,
it was released it was the big Hollywood version released by Universal Studios.
Yeah.
And it is...
I haven't seen it because I just...
Oh, you don't want to. It's the most stupid movie I've ever seen in my life. It started out really good. The first maybe 15, 20 minutes, there's some very creepy, suspenseful scenes and moments in it, and then it just turned utterly ridiculous.
Oh, it's unfortunate.
And it's like, oh.
Yeah, it's I don't know what it is. I mean, it's again, it's a cultural appropriation thing because people are taking the idea and the concept and they bring it over here and they sort of turn it into something that it isn't. And it's unfortunate. And it's even nowadays, like, I mean, my background, my family, we're fairly mixed. My grandmother's family's from Germany originally, but other than that, we're Scottish and Scandinavian. So we didn't really celebrate in the same way, but we had a lot of stories that were more macabre, ghost stories or some like monster tales, that kind of Scottish creatures.
Mhm.
And my grandmother mentioned that her brother used to like to talk about, the Krampus sort of thing to the family when they were young growing up. So it's sort of an interesting play on how it's made its way over here and it's become hugely popular. I mean, even in New Orleans now, they have a Krampus crew
Oh,
and they
really?
do a Krampus parade. Yeah,
Because I
I'm not
know
sure
it's
how it's over.
hugely popular over in Europe that they have parades
Oh,
everywhere.
yes. Yeah, they do. And I think some of the best ones come out of Austria. There's some phenomenal parades in Austria and in Vienna every year. And I did put a little teaser there from the 2010 one, which I think was just the best video capture of it. There's lots of them out there from different years. But that one, the person who was actually filming it was right in the parade, obviously. So they were
Hmm.
in the same, and so I just found the perspective was, and it was just such a perfect sort of magical night because it was snowing and you had all of these, Krampus and these, the old horse-drawn hearses and the fire and all. It's just,
Yeah.
yeah, it just really has sort of this strange magical. And I really liked watching it too because I liked watching the creatures going up to the kids in the crowd, and you didn't see any kids screaming or terrified or you know some kids were like wanting to touch their faces, or there was a couple of kids that looked a little unsure, but for the most part, like I can't even imagine kids here, if they would be screaming,
Yeah.
they'd be terrified, right? But over there, because it's part of the culture and part of what it is, it's obviously the kids grow up with the stories, and so to take part and go and see that parade is probably pretty magical as a kid. I mean, I would have just loved to see that when I was a little
Yeah.
kid. I was a weird little kid, so my brother probably would have been terrified, but me, no, I was just all for the weird stuff. But I would have loved it. But yeah, so let's kind of talk about the origins of Krampus, like, just sort of where it comes from and, why, obviously, I mean, we can see why it's so popular. It's a terrifying sort of half goat, half demon. It's kind of horrific. It's, got the big tongue and it's dragging chains and bells and shaking them and, birch sticks to swat naughty children with. And a lot of them are carrying a sack that they would, take children away in,
Hmm.
the naughty children. And so in reality, it has its base in pagan beliefs, but it's now tied into Catholicism because St. Nicholas is Catholic and he's the patron saint of children. So we now have, Krampus accompanying essentially St. Nicholas in a weird sort of way. Right? And I mean, you've got all of this and sort of the counterparts, right? Because in Germanic religions, I mean, there's Belschnickel and Rat Ruprecht, right? Black bearded man who carries switches and beats children. France has Hans Trapp and Pierre Foutard. And then there's Zwarte Piet in the Netherlands. So they're all kind of different.
It
But yet
varies from region to region.
it does. But yet they kind of still have that same duty. Their duty is to keep naughty children in line, right? And the interesting story is that, like I said before, Krampus's name it comes from the German word Krampen, and which means claw. But Krampus is said to be the son of hell in Norse mythology as well. So we have that tie-in too, right?
I'd read something about that yes, there's some Norwegian legend that
well, it's hell in the Norse mythology. Well, they call it mythology, right? But the Norse story, the gods, and Hel, of course, she has a son, and her son is Krampus, right? The creature that is Krampus. So it's sort of this idea of this terrifying creature that shows up, and I mean, what kid would want to be greeted by that?
Absolutely, yeah.
Outside their door, right? It's like, you get the knock on the door and you're like, well, I wonder who it is. And the kids run to the door, and then suddenly you open the door and here's this terrifying beast on the other side of the door who, scoops you up and puts you in a sack or beats you within an inch of your life with birch rod. So
sure, why not?
yeah,
I mean, I'm sure I've seen kids that are scared going to see Santa at the mall to get their photos taken. That I can just imagine, the knock on the door, and there's Krampus standing there.
I know, with like a sack and a stick and this big, free outfit. And that's the one thing too, like I really love looking back, looking at the traditional costuming. Because originally, the people that did this, they would come down from the mountains, right, into the villages, and there would be not just one, there would be several, right? And sometimes they would accompany St. Nicholas, and other times they would do it the night prior, and they would go door to door. So it's an interesting thing, but these masks were just pieces of art unto themselves because they're all hand carved.
Oh yeah, I've seen photos. Fantastic.
I know.
The work that goes into those.
Yeah, and then the outfits themselves are all made from goat skins with that long out goat with the long hair. And it's just, I mean, the workmanship and the weight of the costume and putting on this mask and these, this big carve and then the horns, right? Which mine don't want to stay on my head, but they're going to be there. But, so you've got this image and then they've got the bells and they're shaking the bells and the bells are ringing and they're cowbells, right? So they're loud and they've got, several of them wrapped around themselves with chains or ropes with these bells, and they're coming down from the mountains, and it would be pretty terrifying, I think.
Well, it would be. I haven't seen the video that you were talking about. Okay. I noticed that you did post it, but I haven't watched it yet.
Oh, do watch it. It's phenomenal.
But as you say, with the costumes in the parade and the fires, that's literally got to be terrifying, as opposed to the delightful little Santa Claus parades that we have here with dancing elves and there they've got these hideous horned creatures, carrying these torches, marching down the street.
Yeah, and shaking these loud bells and these chains and these ropes and, and these long tongues and the eyes. And I mean, they're just, it's something from a nightmare. And for children, it definitely is something from a nightmare. But the story is so simplistic. I mean, it's not a difficult story to understand. And even at the time before Christianity came into it, and these creatures were coming down and going, home to home, the reason was to scare away the evil spirits. Those, that may cross over at that time of year during the solstice, during, that Yule period. And so these creatures would come, and in a weird sort of way, much like we do for Halloween now with jack-o'-lanterns and pumpkins and all of those things when we talked about the Halloween show, there's a tradition in this, right? And there's a reason for it. It's not just to dress up in a scary costume and terrify people. It really had a purpose, and it was rooted in a culture that, for the most part, pre-Christianity, were, a pantheon of gods. I mean, Woden was part of German beliefs, which, we know as Odin, but that story. And so, you had like Odin's, like the wild ride, and that's where Santa comes from, is Odin's wild hunt, his ride, where he, had his goats pulling his sleigh and, flying through the sky at night. And so we get this image of Santa, and, people might want to argue it, but, before the Coca-Cola Santa came along, I mean, we see a very different version of Santa Claus. If you look at European stories, it's Saint Nicholas, right, with the long robe and the more of the mitre hat and the staff, and you know, that kind of stemmed over into Victorian times in England. You start to see that Santa Claus. It looks a little bit like a combination of the Green Man and, you know, this Saint Nicholas thing, where you've got more of the big robes that you may have seen on a druid, or you know, on the idea of the Green Man with these flowing green robes, and or even in Dickens' story, A Christmas Carol, where the ghost of Christmas Present is this large jovial man with his big, you know, sort of pagan robes and his crown and that. So we see a lot of this start to move towards, you know, the Santa that kids know today here in the Victorian era, but it goes through, you know, sort of a different process. And then we see Coca-Cola create the Santa that we have today. So literally that was a way to sell soft drinks, you know, at the time, that were, you know, not quite the soft drink we know it today. But, you know, at that time, it was this large, jovial sort of man, and, you know, and the white beard and the smile. But before that, it seemed a little more sinister and a little bit more, you know, scary. I mean, Saint Nicholas wasn't meant to be terrifying because he was the patron saint for children. So he was the, you know, he was sort of the Christian accompaniment to Krampus, right? So, you know, you had this Krampus creature coming, and then you would have Saint Nicholas come forward, and he would reward the children, right, for being good, while Krampus would terrify the crap out of them. For, you know. But I read a lot. I was reading a lot of sort of older stories, and I love going back and looking at these older stories. Some that people had written in the 1700s, like in the 1700s, they were doing St. Nicholas and Krampus, and they had Krampus knock, and St. Nicholas would come the next day. But I loved the writings of it and the explanations of the stories then, right? How they remembered them. A few writers had written sort of their memories. I guess they've been transcribed into English, obviously German writers at the time, writing about, you know, their remembrance as a child and Krampus and in the village, and how often what would happen too is they would gather at a location, like a town hall or you know, for a dinner, and then Krampus would come in the night to this location, because then all the families and the kids and everyone would be in one spot, right? And they didn't have to go door to door. You know.
Now, is that traditional, that there would be some sort of a feast, like we know today at Christmas, associated with Krampus?
There was a dinner or a breakfast, and I mean, I think really for the towns, obviously, when they got together in those times, going back to, you know, the medieval period and the sort of the Renaissance period, but even pre that, because we're talking pre-Christianity here, but even with the Christianity coming in, you know, it seems like a lot of people would gather in a location and perhaps have a supper, and then you would have Krampus show up, or it may have been a breakfast as well, where Krampus would come the night before, because they would have a party, and the Krampus would come the night before, and then the next morning with the breakfast, St. Nicholas would come and bring the gifts, right? So I think it just depends on the time period, and obviously the locations as to where you were. This was more common out in the small villages and towns than it would have been in the cities, right? So it's a kind of an interesting story, but I think that, you know, where did our modern day obsession with Krampus, it's kind of funny, because I was looking at that and trying to kind of pinpoint back to a period where in sort of our modern vernacular this pops up, and it's really, really recent, like really recent, within the last probably 10 to 12 years, that it's sort of started to show up. And this is, I'm not talking about families who are of German origin or people from Scandinavia or anybody else who may already know the stories. This is, let's say, become the, you know, the pop culture version of Krampus, right? This, you know, they're making movies of Krampus, they're doing all these things. This kind of comes at a time in just maybe the last 10 or 12 years. So it's really kind of taken a modern twist into, what's happening now. And it seems like, again, Krampus sort of was suppressed. The Catholic Church kind of literally out and out forbade any kind of raucous celebrations. And sort of in the Second World War, they really didn't like Krampus because he was considered to be a creation of social democrats. Really interesting because oddly enough, I'm filming a show in a couple of weeks on Nazi secret bunkers or Nazi secret bases.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, it should have been in Germany at a place called Wölfsburg Castle, which was a very well-known SS. It's known as the Temple of Doom. It was where the SS elite hung out, and they sort of started to propagate all kinds of stories and sort of the origins of German people, and they twisted a lot of the history in that. And I think that that's why Krampus at that point became very sort of, no, we don't want to go there, because it had become a part of the whole Nazi Party's idea of getting rid of Christianity and bringing back the old pagan beliefs. Only it wasn't really even the old pagan beliefs; it was their warped version of it. So it sort of seemed to get pushed to the sidelines then. But just like I say, in the last, few years, people are really looking for ways to sort of celebrate Yuletide, and that's not traditional. Well, not traditional here, right? So you start seeing things like Krampus parties and Krampus showing up on TV shows. And like I say, in New Orleans, they have a Krampus parade, and but it's even in Austria, there's areas now that are kind of being condemned because they're commercializing Krampus a lot. So, they're sort of selling chocolates and knickknacks and kitsch of Krampus. And so, it's sort of, I think, annoying the traditionalists.
Yeah.
In terms of, what's happening with Krampus. But I think it's just a fascinating creature.
Thank you for watching The Ghost Show Online. Join your hosts again next week as they discuss more tales of the supernatural, the paranormal, and all things spectacular. See you soon.